Welcome to FinFactor. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dry Run Cash Flow Forecasting Software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind and model everything from cash flow through to complex scenarios with clarity and control. And joining me today is Jared Leuschen from Blue Tree Technology Group, where they help businesses unlock the full potential of technology by delivering enterprise-level IT leadership at a fraction of the cost. And today we'll explore the hidden costs of neglecting strategic IT guidance, how CFOs can build the case for fractional IT leadership, procurement without vendor lock-in, and the practical frameworks to rescue stalled tech projects before they become costly write-offs. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Thank you for having me, Blaine.
So to kick it off here, I want to see, what is the real cost of not having some sort of strategic IT leadership? Because I know there's a lot of companies that it probably gets pushed in the corner and it's like, it's good enough. But, when they start growing, oftentimes businesses don't realize kind of what it's costing until it's almost too late.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we could probably spend hours talking about. The real cost, I think, to try and attempt to simplify it is often related to thinking about how to define this. Where we see the biggest challenge and the biggest risk realized is when we have individuals within an organization that have been in place in their position, right, for a long time. Now we're talking about the CEO, the CFO, and usually whoever's overseeing IT strategy. These individuals are doing their job really well typically, and they are focused on doing the best job they can for their organization. But what they're typically not getting enough of is outside voice, outside information, that what their peers are doing, what their competitors are doing, what the market in general is doing. And because of that, there's a limited set of knowledge base, right, that they're leaning against to make strategic decisions, to make important buying decisions. And so a lot of times what we see more often than not is decisions being made without enough information to be making those decisions, right? And so we get down the path at some point, maybe it's a month, maybe it's 6 months, maybe a year after some of these big, large, important decisions are made. And the people who made those decisions are realizing the impact or the risk that they just didn't even know to think about, didn't know the questions to ask, right? Because they didn't have the right expertise in-house for doing that thing that they've never done before for their organization. And so having outside expertise to come in and bounce ideas off of, and to brainstorm, and to whiteboard, and to talk about the risks that they've seen in other organizations, that can be very valuable before we even get started going down a specific path.
Well, and I suspect it's the chronic, you don't know what you don't know. And of course, the leadership, if they aren't IT experts, right? That's why they need some help. And I'm sure they have limited knowledge. They're definitely not an expert in the area. But sometimes it's easy to overlook maybe how complicated and how big the impact is. And can you think of some circumstances where you've seen impact on organizations where they just ignore something and it's kind of caught up with them?
Sure. I can give you a couple scenarios. The first one coming to mind is what we see frequently when we walk into a new environment for the first time. This is a new client of ours, right? And I don't think we're alone in this, right? We walk into an organization where we typically have a CFO that has inherited a book of business, right? The books for the organization, and decisions that were made long before they entered the scene. And they're coming in with individuals who were involved in those decisions, who are still involved in managing the day-to-day operational side of the decisions that were made. And they only have the information that's provided to them. And they have to trust their people. They have to trust the team. But what we often see in coming in and providing a separate set of eyes is we learn things that they just couldn't know walking in the door, and oftentimes is unforeseeable, right? Like redundant technology, redundant systems. We have what we refer to oftentimes in the industry as shadow IT, right? Where we'll find out that the same functionality that one software solution is providing for marketing is being, a different software tool is being subscribed for by HR or by the sales team. And so we have overlap, redundant systems. We're paying double or triple, sometimes quadruple the amount that we could be if we were to consolidate and standardize. It's difficult to identify what those are, let alone figure out how to reduce spend in that way. That's That's a very common theme that we see. When it comes to new decision making, there's a process to follow that allows an organization and the executives in those organizations to have confidence, short term and long term, in what decisions they are making. And most organizations require a certain level of subject matter expertise in different areas to have that level of confidence. We need analysts that understand how to pull requirements to do this new thing they've never done before. We need project managers that know how to take an initiative that is net new for them or something that they don't experience implementing all the time to get to successful completion. We need someone that knows how to hold outsource third-party support accountable with KPIs and measurable results. We need someone that's going to hold both internal and external people to a budget, right? And depending on the type of project, whether it's a software implementation or a custom build or infrastructure or network, these require different types of experience, different types of skill sets. And most mid-sized organizations don't have the budget to staff these people all the time because they're not doing these projects all the time. And so one of the big areas where we see a need, or at least a strong pull for outside support, is to augment those gaps in experience and expertise to help ensure that an organization and the executives are making really good decisions before they sign on the dotted line, whether it's hiring someone or outsourcing support for the first time.
Well, and these technology costs they can, especially for a mid-market business or larger, they add up, and they can add up really quickly. And we talk with a lot of ERP implementers because, of course, we pull data from the ERP and build out forecasts from it. And it always shocks me on the failure rate of ERP implementations, on the failure rate of AI implementations. They're so incredibly costly, but they're also not just dollars and cents. It's very costly from your team's perspective as well. It's completely disruptive to your team. Dollars going out the door. The disruption leads to all sorts of lack of confidence, frustration. There's so many effects on an organization. And that's just when you're trying to put in new software. And then you started out with, they probably have problems with their existing software they don't even know about. And you start to look at the costs compile so quickly. Mm-hmm. But like you said, there's probably just still not enough work to have a team there or someone in there full time all of the time working on this for a lot of these organizations.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Right? I talk to a lot of CEOs and CFOs that some frequently. Define frequently, right? Probably once or twice a month, I get pulled into a conversation with an executive who's in the middle of an ERP implementation specifically, and they're talking about everything that has gone wrong over the last 6 months and how they don't know what to do because they're in so deep financially, and they don't know if they should pull the plug, start over, or if there's a way to save it. And how do we recover? How do we get to an ROI that actually makes sense that they can present to the board and say, hey, we didn't foul this up completely, when they had very little control over it because they just didn't have a good enough plan to begin with. And that's a challenging position to be in. But there's typically a way out, but it can be very costly and very complicated to do so. But it's very common. It's not, executives out there shouldn't feel alone in that. It's very common. It's hard to do, especially big transformational projects like ERPs, especially migrations. If we're doing an ERP for the first time, that's a little more simple. Not simple, but more simple than a migration. But it's always challenging.
Yeah, and on the ERP side, it's probably almost always a migration. Because the businesses will generally start with a small accounting platform and work their way up, right? And a whole pile of spreadsheets. It's the landmines are everywhere with something like that. And it's, and just talking, like I said, I had a meeting with a friend of mine yesterday that does ERP implementations, and he was, he's sharing with me some of the, it's like, hey, they could have done this and then they didn't. And then this happened and this happened. And then, by the time they were done, the costs had quadrupled, and the costs are in the hundreds of thousands to start with. Right. It's amazing the impact it can have on an organization. So I know, like, we talked a little bit about IT, and you were talking about just some of the other technology overlap. What are some of the areas that are maybe missed? Like, how broad is this technology spectrum where you see gaps and mistakes being made where it's costing organizations a lot of money?
So one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time trying to socialize and make known in the public space is, if you don't have control over your vendor contracts, your vendor spend, address that now. We have a lot of organizations out there that have been working with the same third parties for a long time because they've been in business for a long time. They look at these folks as partners, but we find out down the road, usually when it's too late, that because we're making some strategic decision that's gonna impact, our third party support, or make it null and void, that we're maybe locked in for an auto renew term that goes on for 3 to 5 years, or there's a level of support and integration required with those third-party systems that we just haven't taken into consideration early enough, and there's a cost component to that. So there's a lot of waste, a lot of wasted spend around vendor services that could have been avoided, that can be avoided by simply gaining control over the contracts you have, reviewing them, and then having a system to manage those contracts and provide automated alerts on when things are coming up for renewal, when the auto renew clauses kick in, things of that nature. So that's a big one. The other is boils down to the people component, right? The human component. A lot of the time, what we see when it comes to financial decisions is it boils down to a lack of communication, a lack of collaboration. It's just people have the information. It's just, but not one person has all the information. And so a lot of where I like to spend my time, and my team loves spending time, is figuring out how to bring everybody together and have open dialogue, talk, and share and collaborate on what is considered siloed or in one person's mind that's not documented, that's not known by the rest of the group. And then how do we create a framework, a committee of sorts to make sure that we don't lose that communication as we go on. People have fear, right? They operate in fear a lot of times. And so if you have a new CFO coming in and they're talking about cost control, and you have a VP of IT or a CIO that is trying to focus on innovation and supporting the business vision going forward, those two can be competing priorities, right? And there's a way forward for that. You throw in someone responsible for risk and compliance, that's another layer altogether, right? And so we need to figure out how do we bring people together to talk about what motivates them, what's a priority for them, and when we identify what those things are and how, and can see each other for who we are, and that we're all here to accomplish the same mission, it can create some magic and allow for those barriers to come down, people to not feel so threatened that their job is at risk, that the decisions they've made historically are at risk, that we can remove the ego and start to make decisions that actually benefit the group, and start collaborating in a more meaningful way.
So once you get all that team, basically, okay, we're all on the same page. We understand that we need some systems here. We kind of have a really good idea at multiple levels, from the front line all the way up to management. Like, where can these systems help, and how do you move forward and say, okay, now it's the scary part. We got to go and get some quotes. We got to go to some vendors. What are some of the best practices for making sure you're covering all your bases and getting the best vendors in the door to review? And how do you make that decision? And also, what are some of the landmines that you see where these vendor lock-ins go sideways?
This is a really good question. Yeah, so I like to start with requirements gathering. Like, it's so important. Before we start talking to anybody about the art of the possible, we need to know what we're actually trying to accomplish, and be very, very clear on that, and document and make sure that we understand who our stakeholders are in that decision-making process, and that everyone has bought into the mission, what those success criteria really are. And then once we have that documented, so in the form of a project charter, or maybe a request for proposal, or whatever we're going to name that document, We then want to go to market in a very systematic and best practice way. And that usually starts, or should start, in my opinion, with subject matter experts. There are a lot of third-party advisory firms out there that provide expertise, that have expertise to share. Not all of them charge money to provide that expertise. There are resources available to us before we even start thinking about who to bring in to take advantage of who we know has been successful doing a similar type of project in the past. We should leverage those firms, right? Firms like Gartner and Forrester are known by a lot of organizations because they're the big gorillas out there. But there are a lot of other firms available too that can provide expertise. But we should leverage that. We should find who our advisory team is in this subject matter area that we're focused on, and then we want to figure out how to narrow our view, because so much new technology coming on the landscape today, right, in the market every day, new software tools, etc. How do we narrow that list down? And so we want to have a process, a methodology for filtering out to get down to just a select few, anywhere from 2 to 5, 5 being max, of potential partners, vendors that we think could perform and do a good job based on the advice that we got before walking into that scenario. We want to focus on how to narrow those results down based on business, based on success metrics, based on client references. Can they check all the boxes that are important to us? And then we move from there into a shorter list of actual evaluation, where we're going through features and functions and support and contractual SLAs and pricing and all the things that we need to make a final decision. Having a methodology, there is a way to do this well, but there's not one way to do it right. Having methodology is what's important. The exact methodology used is less important, just so it makes sense for the organization and it falls in line with their culture and doesn't disrupt operational process and in the flow and the workflow. Negotiations don't usually take as much time as vendor evaluation, because during vendor evaluation, we're talking about everything under the sun, so we can get to a decision on how we're going to move forward. But the negotiation process can be lengthy because we're trying to take what we've usually spent weeks or maybe even months talking about and distilling it into a centralized set of documents that we're agreeing on that's going to hold both parties accountable. And there needs to be a methodology for doing that well. And we usually have different people, different stakeholders involved in that process, such as legal counsel, et cetera, that are not involved in the evaluation process. And so having that methodology, I go back to that, Blaine, right? Having that methodology, understanding what are those steps in the process to get from identifying and qualifying and prioritizing an initiative to having a signed contract with a vendor that's going to take us down this path to success. How do we get through that? And do we know who our stakeholders are, who our subject matter experts needed in each of these steps, who our internal people are, where our gaps are, so we're bringing those outside help in when appropriate? Do we understand that? And if we do, does everybody understand that? And has everybody bought into this? And are we clear so that we can follow the process and get to a successful end? That's the most important thing in my mind, because we'll find the people, right? We're all capable. We can do the research, but do we know who's going to do the research and how much time they're going to spend on the research and what they're researching?
Yeah. Yeah. We see so often businesses that come to us and they're on an ERP. This is just, we see this all the time. That's why I'm mentioning it. They're on an ERP it's a vertical specific ERP. And, it's because they sell, green widgets, and this thing's made for green widgets. And it does one thing really well. That is all. It cannot do anything else. And they are so stuck on everything. But it does this one thing we really need. And it's amazing how often the one thing they really need, you could actually build that in pretty much any ERP on the shelf that could do it pretty much everything for you. And it's chronic. But going through the process that you talked about would likely eliminate those problems, because unless there's something that is like, you can't do it anywhere else and it literally drives the business forward, it's I think a lot of times these decisions are just made on a very simple basis, but it's complex, it's complicated, and there's so many moving parts and so many people involved.
Yes, I agree with that. there has to be a way, a methodology for prioritizing the decisions we make along the path, whether it's the type of vendor we're going to bring in, the type of initiative, the features and function set, right? You're talking about a specific functionality that may only fit 10% of the needs of the ERP system, but one stakeholder might put a lot of weight towards that thing, whereas another one or another business unit might put less weight. And so how do we decide how much weight to give a thing, and how do we get buy-in to make sure that we're all on the same page, so that we don't get 3 months down the road and people are complaining because they're not getting the thing that they thought they were going to get. It's not easy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience, of a lot of education.
Yeah, yeah. And then they come to us and say, we really need to forecast. Do you guys integrate with Green Widget ERP? And you're like,
Right.
Sorry to say, nobody does. That's just not going to happen. It's you're on your own. And we have ways to.
I forgot to mention 6 months ago about this thing that's really important to me.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And what are those warning signs? What are some of the other warning signs that this is kind of going sideways, right? Like that you've got some problems in your process and your procurement.
If we don't, project management's critical, right? If we don't have a project manager who has not only established confidence, but continues to establish confidence that they know exactly where we're at in the project and exactly where we're headed and how we're going to get to the goal line, and they can't show evidence of that, that's a major red flag, right? From day one of project kickoff to the completion, at any given moment in time, I should be able to ask the project manager, where are we at? Show me evidence. So that's a big red flag. That's an easy one, and usually the biggest red flag, most easiest one to spot at least, is financially, do we have a schedule, a monetary system that's aligned to a contract that tells us when we are spending X amount of dollars as we move forward in the process? And are we monitoring that? Are we managing that? Are we having weekly, bi-weekly meetings, whatever that cadence is necessary is, to check in and say, hey, not only are we moving the project along, but are we where we thought we were going to be, and are we on budget? As scope creep comes in, do we have a system for evaluating those new requirements and making a quick decision on whether or not we're going to incorporate them, knowing there's going to be budget increase required, right? Or dismissing them or adding them to some backlog down the road. We see financially scope creep come in, and it's usually the biggest cause for breaking through, our ceiling.
Yeah, and that's a scary term every time I hear it. It just gives you shivers.
Cost control is so challenging, and it's not just in technology, right? Just generally, any new project, especially if we haven't done this thing before, or it's been 10 years since we've done the thing, it can impose a lot of risk there. Another flag, stakeholder alignment. We see a lot of times executives have the best intentions. They want to see progress. They have a vision, but when it comes down to actually investing time into making something successful, or to continue to hold people accountable, that can be a challenge. And so we see oftentimes the executives, our project sponsors, are not investing the time as much as they need to make sure that the team knows that this is a priority for the business. And then the last one is just like, does everybody involved know why this is important for the business, how it aligns to the vision, right? Are they bought into that, or are they just getting handed a set of tasks that they need to complete and telling to get it done without understanding the why? So if we identify that we don't have a why, or that it's appearing like people are not clear on the why, we need to take corrective action on that immediately.
Yeah. This has been incredibly valuable, Jared. Who should be getting in touch with you, and how should they get in touch with you if they need a hand with their organization?
Any CEO or CFO that feels like they are lacking confidence in the decisions being made by their team, their organization, decisions they're making themselves, they should reach out. We can help or point them in a direction towards someone who can. I can be reached directly on LinkedIn. Go to my profile. Otherwise, our website has a really easy form to fill out to request
Terrific. And I'll make sure that both those links are in the show notes for you. And if you're a CFO, controller on the finance team, and you guys are buried in spreadsheets to forecast your cash flow, especially, and figure out where your business is going, be able to report something that's clear and easy to understand to management, please come see us at dryrun.com. We would love to help you out and get you out of those nasty spreadsheets. Thanks again, Jared. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Blaine.